um, especially for us uh, Muslims, is to look into how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals these ayat. And again, we mentioned before, every single word, every single letter, every single ayah belongs to where it belongs. It's there, it should be there, it does not fit anywhere else. He tells the story, and then he says, وَقُلِ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Then he says, إِنَّا اعْتَدْنَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ نَارًا أَحَاطَ بِهِمْ سُرَادِقُهَا وَإِنْ يَسْتَغِيثُوا يُغَاثُوا بِمَاءٍ يَشْوِي الْوُجُوهِ بِمَاءٍ كَالْمُهْلِ يَشْوِي الْوُجُوهِ بِئْسَ الشَّرَابُ وَسَاءَتْ مُرْتَفَقًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the story of the people of the cave, and that's when actually your iman is being tested. So what just happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just showed you a sign, and this sign is what we call a miracle. He just told you a story that happened in the past to a bunch of youth, they fitya, meaning they're young, and he just told you how that entire story unfolded. And then he's saying, now to the Prophet ﷺ, and of course because he was asked about it by the Jews in Medina, and of course there are people around who are listening to this, and we are reading and listening to this, and he's saying, وَقُلِ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying through the Prophet ﷺ, saying, al-haq, this is the truth. Like this story is a true story, it happened. Then he says, these were actually the second part of al-hidayah. He says, you know what? Whoever, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ, whoever wants to believe, believes. Because remember, if you do not believe in the story, that means you do not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because He is the one who revealed this to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all of the other stories. So one thing that I would tell you is, sometimes you might find yourself struggling a little bit. It's like, how could that happen? For instance, let's be honest. Yunus alayhi salam, the story, when you think about it, he was in the belly of the whale inside the ocean, and there are own measurements, he should not have survived. He should not have survived. Like, it doesn't make sense. There's no way that he should have survived. So I'm going to take COVID-19, which is scaring all of us, or most of us. They found out that the very young ones are less likely to develop any severe symptoms or dying. Doctors actually, they said this. They said, we have no idea how this is happening. Like, with their own measurements, younger kids tend to have weaker immune systems, especially babies and toddlers, because their immune system is still building. Yet the older ones, they say, if you have a weak immune system, you're more likely to die. Not just to get sick, to actually die. So here's a beautiful example. You're saying, by all the scientific evidence that we have, it just doesn't make sense for kids not to get sick. Actually, they should have an equal exposure, at probably an equal, even a higher rate of death compared to those who have a weak immune system or those who are of old age. But actually, it's exactly the opposite. They're less likely to get sick. If they get sick, they don't show symptoms. If they show symptoms, they're very mild. If they do have symptoms, their mortality rate is like next to zero. Well, take that as an example. Doctors cannot explain it. Science cannot explain it, because a lot of times we go back to science to have the evidence, right? But they're not able to explain it. So when you think about these stories, how could somebody live for this long? Or how could somebody survive in the belly of the whale, and so on and so forth? Your iman, usually you start looking and saying, okay, so I don't have enough knowledge to kind of like you know, prove this, but also it's being told to me as a fact, as something that happened. So how do I actually, work with this? This is where the iman comes in. This is where you have to believe because it's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another thing for us to help us is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us evidence in other things. So if He has proven to us things that we have enough knowledge to check, even though people before us did not have the knowledge to check and confirm, then with no doubt we should believe in things that we have no knowledge about. And yes, goes against our common sense. And we have to believe that's Iman. So this is where actually Iman comes in. And this was actually said to the people of Medina, who had no evidence to prove a lot of things, not to prove, but to check, not even because these are things from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I'm trying to use a term where, because we don't check what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to them, to us as a truth. But just like think of it this way, to have yaqeen, because that's what Ibrahim alayhi salam did, right? He said, show me how you revive the dead, and the dead, and Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him, it's like, you didn't believe? He said, no, to have yaqeen in my heart. So that's what we're doing, maybe. Look at it that way. So we were able to have that with a lot of things that were mentioned in the Quran, and only now we actually gained enough knowledge to actually say, wow, it is, it is true. It's not that we would have doubted it, and I pray that we did not doubt it, but that's the point. The story was told. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is the truth from your Lord. If you choose to believe, you believe. If you choose not to believe, you don't believe. But he gave the warning after that, and then he says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ إِنَّا لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ مَنْ أَحْسَنَ عَمَلًا. And he even explains and goes in details about what the reward is. Again, he mentioned that at the beginning of the surah. He said, we give glad tidings to those who believe and they do that which is good. Again, you would look and say, well, he mentioned it. Why is he mentioning it here? He has to mention, and he's mentioning it a little bit differently. He mentioned it in a different surah, because this is what the whole Islam is all about. Believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing that which He commanded us to do, and by default staying away from that which He told us to stay away from. But if we look and assess ourselves, how many of us are actually in that continuous state, having that iman, always doing that which is right and staying away from that which is wrong. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason He keeps mentioning it is to wake up call for us to say, told you that before, now check yourself between these two verses. The time that is taken, the stories that happened, whether it is during the time that you're reading or throughout your life. As you're going through these experiences, check. Are you still in that state? And then check again. So this is actually a message to keep telling us, keep checking yourself. Are you in that state? Are you in that state? And if you are, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you're guaranteed Jannah. You're guaranteed all the rewards that actually come with that. And then subhanAllah, He, after that story, He says, وَاضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلًا رَجُلَيْنِ جَعَلْنَا لِأَحَدِهِمَا جَنَّتَيْنِ مِنْ أَعْنَابٍ وَحَفَفْنَاهُمَا بِنَخْلٍ وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمَا زَرْعًا كلتا الجنتين آتت أكلها ولم تظلم منه شيئا وفجرنا خلالهما نهرا وكان له ثمر فقال لصاحبه وهو يحاوره أنا أكثر منك مالا وأعز نفرا ودخل جنته وهو ظالم لنفسه قال ما أظن أن تبيد هذه أبدا وما أظن الساعة قائمة ولئن رددت إلى ربي لأجدن خيرا منها منقلبا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this, and this is something to be scaled at different situations and circumstances. It's a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about. He describes the blessing. It's the two gardens, and with the water, the running water between them, the river running between them, um, and that person thought that was a blessing, that it's because of his own doing, because he also refers to his own children. And as we know, back in the days, children, they were a sign of power. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here describes this person who also thought that, the hour would never come. He says, وَدَخَلَ جَنَّتَهُ وَهُوَ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. This is actually something for every one of us to actually look at. And it doesn't matter whether you're a student or not, because you might say, well, I'm still young, I don't have much. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the blessings and continue to give you the blessings. And either you're going to be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that will be for your own good. Or you could do the opposite, and the only one you're transgressing against is yourself. So for instance, and look at this, because he was having a conversation, right, with somebody else, and he was comparing himself to that person. So as a student, if you're quote unquote smarter kid, and you start comparing yourself to others, like, oh, I'm smarter than you, I know more, and all of that, and you're serious about it, even jokingly, you have to be careful. But let's say that you're serious, you're saying, you know what, I'm better than that person, and you start saying that person is, all the terms that you guys use. You're transgressing against yourself, because what you're saying is Allah is not fair enough, and you're not recognizing that. You're saying He's not fair enough that He has given you what He did not give the other, which put you in a position that you just brag about it and boast about it, as you're talking to the other person, right? You say, I have more than you, because this one, He says, أنا أكثر منك مالا وأعز نفرا. He said, I have more wealth and I'm more powerful. I have more people on my side, right? So it was an explicit and direct comparison. So of course, at the adulthood, unfortunately, people will say, well, I have this position, I'm a doctor, or I'm an engineer, I'm that and that, and you're nothing, you're just whatever that you're doing. That's exactly what actually this guy did. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this story. But the reality is, including you students, you do this more often than you think you're doing it. You don't have to have a garden to compare yourself to somebody else. You don't have to have a lot of kids to compare yourself to somebody else. It's just something that you might have and others don't, and you use it to compare yourself. Whether you say it explicitly and, out loud, or you say it to yourself and you start saying, well, I'm better than that person, then you are transgressing against yourself. Because anything, is just the Prophet ﷺ said, if you start counting at the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you about, in one hadith, it was the water and the bread. Another one, it was water and meat. But the point is, if you're able to feed yourself, that's something that is a blessing at that moment, but it's something you're going to be asked about later. So the one thing that you should be doing is to say, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me this, and I can see clearly that somebody else might have not been given that, that means I'm actually in a little, probably more difficult situation, because I'll be asked about something that I was given and others were not given. So it should never be the opposite of saying, well, I have it, therefore I'm better. You should be saying, I have it, therefore I'm more responsible. And that's something that you should learn from this story of the guy with the two gardens. But if you're finding yourself in the other position, where you might see others who might have something that you don't, and clearly you don't have everything, so there has to be a lot of things that others have and you don't, then you should be actually thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because what the other one says, he says, قال له صاحبه وهو يحاوره أكفرت بالذي خلقك من تراب ثم من نطفة ثم سواك رجلا لكن هو الله ربي ولا أشرك بربي أحدا ولولا إذ دخلت جنتك قلت ما شاء الله لا قوة إلا بالله إن ترني أنا أقل منك مالا وولدا فعسى ربي أن يؤتيني خيرا من جنتك ويرسل عليها حسبانا من السماء فتصبح صعيدا زلقا أو يصبح ماؤها غورا فلن تستطيع له طلبا. And of course after that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes what happened to the garden. Amazingly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not mention the second person as a prophet. He does not mention the name, but he mentions the way, the state of that person, which of course was reflected on what he said. He said, أكفرت بالذي خلقك من تراب. And then he goes through the whole thing. But the point is, he reminded him that you as a person, you are of no value other than the value of dust that you were created from, which makes all of us equal. Okay, remember, no one is better than anybody else because we're all made out of dust. So to my students, those who think you know who you are, you think that you know your tribe is better than somebody else's tribe, and you know your group of people are better than others and all that, this is a story for you. What he's saying is we're all made out of dust, nothing else. Like really, like all you are is dust. It doesn't matter where you're coming from, whether you're an Arab, Pakistani, Afghan, African American, Caucasian, whatever country you come from, Indian, it doesn't matter. He's saying the moment that you start seeing yourself better than others, meaning racism, sexism, any of these isms, you are rejecting in a way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his ordained, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says you're all equal. We're all equal, we're all the same. It doesn't matter where you come from or what you have. Okay, so it's not just where you're coming from, it's the possession that you have. So the moment that you start saying I'm better than others, you know, because I am from this country and they're from a different country, or because my people did this and their people did not, or whatever it might be. This guy said, أكفرت, because kufr is a big thing. Of course, we have different levels of kufr, but it starts at that. And as we know, the Prophet ﷺ actually said it about racism, especially. He says, "Da'uha fa'innaha natina," leave it for it stinks. So this is actually probably the one lesson that we have to take from this story of the person that owns the two gardens, and the conversation that he had with the other one. Because remember what he told him, and he did not say فعسى أن يؤتيني فعسى ربي أن يؤتيني خيرا من جنتك في الدنيا. He didn't say في الدنيا. The second person, when he was talking to the other one, after he told him, is like, are you in that state of kufr, and you know, you're rejecting the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and almost you're saying it's mine, it's my doing, and also you are so attached to dunya that you are saying, you know, there will be no day of judgment, and if there is, I'll have something even better. It's like you're almost having that promise that you made to yourself, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no you know, no role to play in it. He says, for my Lord may give me something that is better. Because he said, prior to that, he says, لَكِنَّهُ وَاللَّهُ رَبِّي وَلَا أُشْرِكُ بِرَبِّي أَحَدًا. He said, part of actually accepting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as your Lord is actually to accept the fact that he created us equal. Because once you reject one, you're rejecting the other. And he said, also, I would not associate anyone with him, because here's the thing. The moment you say that I got this because of my own doing, and astaghfirullah, you could be thinking Allah has nothing to do with it. then you are in that state of shirk, and you're putting yourself in that power or authoritative position, saying, I decided what's going to happen to me. You don't decide what's going to happen to you. You work towards this. We mentioned this earlier. You make that tawakkul, you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you know at the end it's in the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then of course the person rejected the hour, which also, again, that's actually, if you rejected, that's kufr. But he was referring to the entire thing, because he said, and if it happens, right, then I'll have something even better. But the second person, again, if you remember, he said, Allah may give me something better, but he didn't say in dunya. So again, if you don't have something that others have, one thing that you have to think about, as Muslims, we don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if he gives you something, then he's pleased with you, and if he takes it away from you, then he's displeased with you. We mentioned this, especially for the high schoolers. We talked about this before. We don't believe in that. We believe that the world is nothing but trials, and yes, you get tried by good and bad, meaning if something is given to you, just like I mentioned earlier, the one thing or the mindset that you should have is, well, that means I'm more responsible. That means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask me about something that he would not ask this person about, because simply this person doesn't have it, right? So that is a blessing that is also a test. But of course, he also may choose not to give you something, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't like you. If you don't have it, that means it doesn't mean that he doesn't like you. Actually, one thing I'm going to stop at, this is really actually a unique story for us to learn. There was somebody who was called Yamama, because he used to spend a lot of time at the masjid, but he was poor. So he went to the Prophet ﷺ, and he asked him, he said, Ya Rasulullah, make a dua for me that I'll be rich. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, maybe poverty is better for you. He said, no, Ya Rasulullah, I'm seeing all these people, donating all that. I want to be rich so I can give, so I can support Islam. The Prophet ﷺ said, maybe poverty is better. The person insisted on that the Prophet ﷺ makes dua, and of course he made dua for him. He became rich. He did not even pay zakah. And we know that later, I believe it was with Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, I could be wrong, then he said, oh, I want to give my zakah. And Umar radiallahu anhu said, the one who doesn't give the Prophet ﷺ his zakah, I'm not going to take his zakah. So it's that person was in a better position. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give him something that will destroy him, but he thought that having it would make him a better Muslim, and actually it destroyed him. So if you look at this story, everybody wants to have the two gardens and the river, right? I mean, not exactly the two gardens and the river, wealth, money, position, but actually, believe it or not, it might be the worst thing that could happen to you. Again, we're not saying, Ya Allah, don't give me. Always say, give me if there's khayr in it for my deen and my dunya. My deen first and my dunya. And if there's no khayr in it, then keep it away from me, and give me that contentment that you took it away from me. Okay. And of course, we know what happened to this person. The gardens were destroyed. And this also, again, takes us to another story, because remember, the scholars, they always go back and forth between these stories, and we should follow in that. Of course, we know the story of Qarun. Qarun was actually among the followers of Musa alayhi salam. So for somebody to say, well, that would never happen to me, as long as I'm Muslim, I would not find my position where I'm, kind of like, leaving my Islam or claiming that all of this is mine if I become rich. Well, Qarun was actually among the people of Musa, but we know exactly what happened to him. And of course, there are people who looked at Qarun and they said, we wish we have what Qarun has, but others who actually understood better, they did not make the same dua. They made the statement that this is not the best that could happen to you. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made earth to swallow Qarun and all of his wealth. So that's something that we have to learn from that story of the owner of the two gardens. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah, again, he talks about other things, but we're going to skip them before we get to the other story that I want to go over. Surprise, surprise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ صرفنا في هذا القرآن للناس من كل مثل وكان الإنسان أكثر شيء جدلا وما منع الناس أن يؤمنوا إذ جاءهم الهدى ويستغفروا ربهم إلا أن تأتيهم سنة الأولين أو يأتيهم العذاب قبلا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again speaking of al-hidayah, it's almost, if you notice, after every single story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes back to al-iman, goes back to al-hidayah. It says here, and in the Quran we give you all examples. Of all examples, you will find a story that will fit in your life like perfectly, as if it was custom made. But of course there are those who choose not to see themselves in the stories, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying there is not a single situation that you might find yourself in and we did not speak about it, whether it's through stories, through lessons, whatever it might be. It's there. This book is for us. It's as people say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us and gave us this Quran as a kind of like the user manual. This is how you live your life. This is how you function. If you do this, something is going to break. If you do that, you're going to excel. And so on and so forth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, it's here. But He says, وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرَ شَيْءٍ جَدَلًا. Jadala is like when you argue. It's like, as humans, it could be like, it's there in clear sight, right in front of us, the hidayah. And again, we have stories. That in itself, we have a lot of stories, just like it happened to this person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about, and so many others. We love jidal. We love to argue. We have it now. It's like a lot of people, when you try to invite them to Islam, it's like, oh, well, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with this. They're not necessarily looking for guidance. They're more looking for reasons not to listen to the guidance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that actually says, وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرَ شَيْءٍ جَدَلًا, meaning just like when we went, Surah Al-Asr, it says by default we're all lost. By default, unless we restrain ourselves, we love to argue. And here actually specifically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the amthal, the examples that He has given us, and hidayah that He has given us in the Quran. People love to argue against it, right? That's why scholars will tell you there are two types of questions. There are people who will ask you the question because they're curious, they want to learn, right? And the Prophet ﷺ had so many of his companions ask questions, and they were seeking knowledge to actually improve themselves. But there are actually those who will ask questions to kind of almost like block you and prove you wrong. So those actually, the scholars, they say, do not even entertain them. Again, because you will enter jidal and you're not actually, an invitation is never in a way that you're arguing with someone. You don't argue with someone to invite them to Islam, right? So you don't want to find yourself in arguments, because if somebody really wants to be guided, they will be guided. Again, you're going to clarify things. You have to clarify things, give the answers. But when you find yourself kind of like, trying to really argue and prove somebody wrong, as he's trying to prove you wrong, she's trying to prove you wrong, I would say just try not to entertain that person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says after that, because if you are finding yourself in that argument, alhamdulillah, all of our students, I'm assuming you're Muslim, right? You better be Muslim. Because here he's talking about insan in general. And because we find ourselves in those arguments, then again, just like he was mentioning in Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Baqarah, and so many others surahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the hidayah that was given to them as signs, but they rejected. So here it says, وَمَا مَنَعَ النَّاسَ أَن يُؤْمِنُوا إِذْ جَاءَهُمُ الْهُدَى وَيَسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّهُم إِلَّا أَن تَأْتِيَهُمْ سُنَّةُ الْأَوَّلِينَ أَوْ يَأْتِيَهُمُ الْعَذَابُ قُبُلًا. It's amazing how in this ayah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like, what is preventing people? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not asking to look for an answer, okay? He's actually, it's like when you're amazed, it's like really, like what's stopping you from believing